Hi everyone and welcome to the third episode of Grandmaster Games. And as mentioned before, today we will be going through one of Magnus Carlsen's games, the reigning world chess champion. A shout out to rreyv once again, who subscribed for the third month in a row to my Twitch channel. Thank you for your continued support, man. I mean, every month I see that he subscribed to my channel and gives me that little bit of motivation to continue doing this. And Chess Poems, who was top chairer on my stream, he's a good chess player and streamer as well, so do check out his stream on Twitch. His username is the same as mentioned here. Also, he has a YouTube chess channel, so you can check that as well. I will post the link in the video description. And then simontwitchh, aka Timonov, who was the second top chairer. He is also a very good chess player and a regular viewer on my stream. And then we have mericacheese, who was the third top chairer last week. So thank you very much for the support, guys. And now the customary quote, which is also from Magnus Carlsen. I feel sorry for players who are always lying awake at night brooding over their games. Are you one of those players that Magnus feels sorry about? Now, I'm not gonna say I'm not, because I, just like many others, have difficulty facing losses in chess. But of late, I have been trying to give my losses less thought, because you know what, at the end of the day, it's just a game. And this has been helping me feel more liberated and comfortable with my chess. I guess what really matters is that you play it with passion, give it your best shot, and most importantly, just have a good time. Because chess is a beautiful game, and it's a shame to waste its beauty thinking too much about lost games. Now, I don't think Magnus Carlsen needs much of an introduction, but he certainly deserves one. And seeing this is my first video on one of his games, it makes sense to do one. But I'll keep it brief since most of us already know about him. Hailing from the land of Vikings, Norway, Magnus Carlsen is the current world chess champion. A chess prodigy, he achieved FIDE Grandmaster status at the age of 13. He achieved a peak classical rating of 2882, the highest in history. He became the world chess champion in 2013 after defeating Vishwanathan Anand of India, and defended it successfully once again against Anand in 2014. He defended his title yet again against Sergei Karjakin of Russia in 2016 and Fabiano Caruana of USA in 2018. Although known to be an attacking player as a youngster, Carlsen now uses a wide repertoire of openings in his games to make it more difficult for his opponents to prepare against him, given the advancements in chess computer analysis. His positional and endgame skills have drawn comparisons of him with former world champions such as Bobby Fischer, Anatoly Karpov, Vasily Smyslov, and Jose Raul Capablanca. So some big names in there. And Garry Kasparov, another great chess player, observed of Carlsen. In 6 months of working with Magnus, I have seen in him many qualities of the great champions. Now, the first Grand Slam final was held in Bilbao, Spain in September 2008. And in this tournament, the Soviet chess rules were used, which forbid players from agreed draws before 30 moves. A soundproofed and air-conditioned glass cube was constructed for the tournament, allowing spectators to closely watch the players inside, as you can see from the picture in the video. And this was game 16 of the tournament in round 6, and Magnus had the white pieces. His opponent with the black pieces was Aronian Levon, the super GM from Armenia. And at the time, Magnus had a classical rating of 2775. So he was already well on his way to breaking chess records. And Aronian, his opponent, had a rating of 2737 at the time. So without further ado, let's get into the moves of the game. Magnus began with d4 and Aronian responded with d5, and after c4 and c6 we have the Slav defense. which is an opening that has been explored extensively since the 1920s and was played a lot during the World Chess Championship matches in 1935 and 1937 between Alexander Alekhine and Max Euwe. Play then continued with simple developing moves, knight f3 developing the kingside knight for white, and similarly knight f6 by black, knight c3 developing the queenside knight, and here Aronian played in e6 where we have the semi-Slav defense. Another line to take note of before e6 is the chameleon or Chebanenko variation where black opts for the move a6, and this is an odd looking move because it's a flank pawn move, and generally in the early part of the game you should avoid going for flank pawn moves. And this is a line that I come across quite frequently playing in the Slav defense as white in my online games. Black usually likes to develop its light squared bishop in this line to f5 or either g4 before going for the move e6, which shuts off this diagonal for the bishop, in which case you can fianchetto it over to b7. And similarly, white likes to develop its dark squared bishop over to f4, gaining control over this important dark squared diagonal. And the move a6 also prepares a b5, where black aims for expansion on the queen side. And white can counter that by playing a c5, which temporarily locks the pawns over here. And in this position, b6 and e5 both become important pawn breaks for black later on in the game. Play can continue over here with the bishop f5, bishop f4, knight d7, h3, e6 and e3. And this bishop on f4 also keeps an eye on the b8 square, so if the b file ever opens up later on in the game, then black is going to have difficulty in challenging it with one of its rooks. But in the game, Levon went with e6 and Magnus continued with e3, freeing up the movement for his light squared bishop. Now knight to d7 by Levon and bishop d3. And white generally avoids going for a move like c takes on d5 so as not to open up lines for black. And as such, white is okay on losing a couple of tempos on the bishop after bishop to d3, c takes on d5, d takes on c4, and bishop takes on c4. Now b5, kicking the bishop as was played in the game. And with b5, we have the Meran variation, which is the main variation of the semi-Slav defense. Yet another line to take note of after bishop to d3 over here, instead of bishop to d3 over here, is the move queen to c2, which is the anti-Meran variation. And a common response by black in this line is a bishop to d6. And the idea over here is to wait for black to commit d takes on c4 before developing the light squared bishop, so you don't have to lose a tempo on the bishop. And this move, queen to c2, was advocated by Anatoly Karpov and was popular in the 1990s. But in the game, we have this position. So Magnus's bishop is threatened. As such, he played bishop to d3, and Levon continued development with a bishop to b7, developing the queenside bishop. And in this position, instead of bishop to b7, there is another line to take note of, which is a6, where black aims for expansion on the queenside once again, since a6 now prepares the move c5. And white can counter that by pushing towards the center with e4. Play can continue over here with e5, c5, e5, c takes on d4, knight takes on b5, as was played in the World Chess Championship match between Kramnik and Anand in 2008. But in the game, Levon went with bishop to b7. And now a3 by Magnus, which discourages black from playing b4. However, Levon played it anyways. b4, and now knight to e4 by Magnus, which keeps the initiative going for white. White also has the option of taking the pawn on b4, but it allows bishop takes on b4, and after castling by white, white doesn't have much opening initiative left over here. So instead, knight e4 by Magnus, and now knight takes on e4, bishop takes on e4, and b takes on a3. And if black goes for developing its bishop over here instead of taking the pawn with something like bishop to e7, then white gets an edge after a takes on b4, since black will have to lose a move later on in the game in order to capture this pawn on b4. As such, b takes on a3 was played by Levon. Now castling by Magnus. Knight f6 by black, gaining a tempo on the bishop on e4. So now bishop to d3, and a takes on b2. So white sacks a pawn over here in order to get some initiative on black's slow development of its dark squared bishop. Bishop takes on b2 and a5, which is a position that has been reached in quite a few games, including one that was played in the World Championship tournament in 2007 between Boris Gelfand and Vladimir Kramnik, where Gelfand, playing with the white pieces, went for the move queen to a4. And this move queen to a4 is also recommended by Stockfish in this position. But Magnus, who is known for his creativity and positional skills, came up with a very interesting idea over here and went ahead with a novelty move, d5. This game is unique in the sense that I could not find any other game where this move was played in this position. Over here being either queen b3 or queen a4 being the most common responses by white. So what is Magnus's idea behind sacking a second pawn here? Let's have a look at the options. One of the options is not to actually take the pawn, but unfortunately it's not a good option, because after t takes on c6, you will either lose a tempo over here on the bishop, or you will get an isolated pawn on e6. So you have to take out the pawn, and black does have quite a few options of taking out the pawn, including c takes on d5, e takes on d5. Alternatively, it can also take the pawn with the queen as well as with the knight. So let's look at all these four options one by one. C takes on d5 loses on the spot for black, and if you would like to see for yourself how, then you can go ahead and pause the video. I will give you a few seconds. Bishop b5 check, and black is losing material here. After knight to d7 blocking the check, if king to e7 here, then bishop a3 check is crushing, because now black loses the queen. So instead, knight to d7, but now comes knight e5, adding further pressure to the penned knight. Bishop c8 supporting the knight, but now rook c1, and here Stockfish gives the best move as bishop b4. So now comes rook takes on c8, rook takes on c8, and now bishop takes on d7 check, and it's game over for black. So if c takes on d5 doesn't work, then maybe e takes on d5 is okay, and it's actually not that bad. After knight to d4, bishop b4, queen f3, and castling by black with roughly an equal position, where black is going to have difficulty in holding on to its two-pawn advantage, given that white has a lot of pressure on the king side because of its active bishop pair, the aggressive knight on d4, as well as the queen on f3. And yet another option for black is to take the pawn out with the queen. And this is the move that is also recommended by Stockfish in this position, where after knight e5 we have once again an equal position. But in the game, Levon decided to take the pawn out with his knight, which was a slight inaccuracy since this knight is a bit misplaced over here on d5. And Magnus continued here with a knight e5, and now knight back to f6 by Levon. And in case you're wondering, why not bring the knight over here to b4, which is a more aggressive square for the knight since it attacks the light squared bishop, then you might get away with this move in a blitz game if your opponent misses queen h5, which threatens a mate in 1 on f7 and gives an advantage of over a pawn to white. But against a classical game with Magnus Carlsen, the odds might be against you in that one. So instead, knight to f6 by Levon, and now queen a4 by Magnus, developing the queen as well as connecting the rooks. Bishop b4 by Levon, finally developing the dark squared bishop. And black simply doesn't have enough time over here to go for a move like rook to c8, defending the pawn on c6, because then white gets an edge after rook f to d1. So instead, bishop to b4, but now knight takes on c6, so black gives up a pawn in order to complete its development. Bishop takes on c6 and not queen to d7, which fails to bishop b5. So instead, bishop takes on c6, but now comes queen takes on c6 check, and black is not in time to castle. Black just doesn't have enough time to castle. King e7 over here. If knight to d7 here blocking the check, then white gets an advantage of around 4 pawns in this position because of the pinned knight, which is going to get exploited. After the continuation, rook f to d1, rook c8, queen a4, castling, bishop b5, knight c5, rook takes on d8, knight takes on a4, rook takes on f8 check, king takes on f8, and bishop takes on a4 wins material for white. So instead, king e7, and now rook f to d1 by Magnus, eyeing the black queen indirectly. Rook c8, threatening the queen, as such queen f3, and now queen b6 by Levon, developing the queen as well as connecting the rooks. But now comes bishop d4, and the queen retreats to a passive b8 square. Bishop a6 by Magnus, threatening to win the exchange, and in this position Levon played a slight inaccuracy with rook d8. Much better for black over here would have been rook to c2, bringing the rook over to the 7th rank, where play could have continued with h3, rook d8, bishop d3, and now rook back to c8, since the light squared bishop has retreated, so black can play this move. And there is a possibility of a threefold repetition over here, because if white goes ahead with something like rook a to b1, then black gets an edge after e5. But in the game, rook d8 was played by Levon, and now bishop b7 by Magnus, which was also a slight inaccuracy. Better for white in this position was playing either rook a to b1 or rook d to c1, bringing the rook to the open file, where black cannot challenge it immediately with one of its rooks, thanks to the bishop on a6. But instead, bishop to b7, and now h5 by Levon. And with this move, white's advantage grows to around a pawn. Better for black over here would have been e5, threatening the bishop on d4, where we have bishop b6, rook d6, rook takes on d6, queen takes on d6, bringing the queen to a more active square, and now bishop takes on a5 with roughly an equal position for both sides. But h5 by Levon, and Magnus played h3, which adds some protection to g4, as well as makes the h2 square available for the king once the black queen gets off of this diagonal. But this was unnecessary, since it reduces white's advantage, and better over here for white would have been once again a rook a to b1, bringing the rook to a more active file. But Magnus went with h3, and now h4 by Levon himself, missing out on possibly the last opportunity for equality with the same continuation e5, where we have bishop b6, rook d6, rook takes on d6, queen takes on d6, and bishop takes on a5, the same line that we just went through. So h4 by Levon, and Magnus played rook a to b1. e5 by Levon, better late than never. Rook white has the initiative over here, and Magnus found the best move where the rook takes on b4, and Levon blundered the entire game in just one move by accepting this exchange sacrifice with a takes on b4. Best play suggested by Stockfish over here is rook takes on d4. Here we have rook takes on d4, e takes on d4, e takes on d4, rook d8, queen a3 check, but now queen d6 blocking the check, queen takes on a5, king f8, bishop f3, knight d7, rook c1, knight e7, and d5, where white has an extra pawn, but with accurate play, black has some drawing chances. But with a takes on b4, white's advantage jumps from over a pawn over 8 pawns. And if you would like to spot the first move of a winning continuation for white here, then you can go ahead and pause the video. Bishop c5 check is crushing for black, since it exposes the king to white's advantage here. And Levon tried king e6, which was pretty much forced, because if you go for a move like king to e8 over here, then it's just bad, because the rook on h8 gets disconnected, and then comes bishop c6 check, which is devastating for black. So instead, king e6 by Levon, but now rook a1 by Magnus, rerouting the rook to come to a8. Rook d6 by black, Levon offering some material in order to get out of trouble, but it's a bit too late. And in case you're wondering, e4 over here, then white has rook a6 check, rook d6, but now simply bishop takes on e4, where black cannot take the rook on a6, otherwise it's getting mated after rook takes on a6, and queen f5 is checkmate. So rook d6 was played by Levon, and Magnus accepted this exchange sacrifice with bishop takes on d6 and king takes on d6. If over here queen takes on d6, it fails to rook a6, which simply wins the queen for white. So instead, king takes on d6, but now queen c6 check is very strong for white. It forces king e7, and now rook a8, threatening to win the queen. As such, queen d6 by Levon offering an exchange of the queens, and Magnus once again accepted with a queen takes on d6 check. Also good for white over here is simply taking the rook on h8. But Magnus, presumably wanting to simplify and go in a winning endgame, accepted the trade-off of the ladies with the queen takes on d6. So now king takes on d6, and white wins a brand new rook over here with a rook takes on h8. And I'm sure if this rook had a voice, it would cry out, "What did I ever do to deserve this?" Because the poor guy never moved once in the game. So rook takes on h8, and we say bye-bye to the crying rook. And Levon played on over here with for a bit, But after b3, bishop a6, knight d7, rook takes on a4 and knight c5, he threw in the towel, since white will easily stop black's pass pawn over here, given the material advantage that it's carrying. Could even go for a move like rook to b4 over here, simply sacking the bishop, eat the pawn, and go on and win the end game easily. So there you go, a game by Magnus, one among many others during his rise to prominence, and one that I really enjoyed, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Eventually in time I plan on covering more of Magnus's games, and in the next episode we will have a magician from Riga in the show with us, so stay tuned for that. All right, till next time, take care.